On the night of April 14th, 1912, the most famous ship in history served 11 courses to first-class passengers, while third-class passengers, one deck below, ate boiled potatoes and stewed figs. Number 7 on this list cost more per plate than a steerage ticket for the entire voyage. Number 19 was the same meal served in New York City tenements the same week. And number 3, the dish placed in front of the wealthiest people in the world just hours before the ship hit the iceberg has never appeared on an American dinner table since. I'm Timothy, and this is American Food Memories. Hit that subscribe button. We're counting down the 25 foods passengers actually ate aboard the Titanic on her one and only voyage. Number 25, oatmeal porridge. Every morning in third class began the same way, a bowl of oatmeal porridge, thin and plain, served in the White Star Line dining room on E-deck, with a side of bread and a cup of tea with sugar. This was breakfast for roughly 700 steerage passengers, who had paid between $7 and $9 for the crossing, the equivalent of several weeks' wages for a working man in 1912. The porridge was not special. It was not intended to be. It was the same oatmeal that fed factory workers in Manchester, coal miners in County Cork, and farm laborers in Warsaw. The people eating it were not tourists. They were immigrants crossing an ocean to start over, carrying everything they owned in a single trunk. Most of them had eaten porridge every morning of their lives. The Titanic was not yet different. For a few more days, breakfast would still feel like home. Number 24, cabin biscuits. Hard, dry, and built to last, cabin biscuits were the hardtack of the passenger ship era. White Star Line issued them as a standard provision in all 3 classes, but they showed up most often at third-class tables, where they served as the bread course at lunch and dinner. A cabin biscuit in 1912 was made from plain white flour, water, and salt, baked until every trace of moisture was gone. They kept for months in the ship's stores without spoiling. Passengers softened them in tea or beef broth before eating. No one called them good. No one threw them away either. These were the same biscuits carried aboard merchant ships for 200 years. The Titanic was the grandest vessel afloat, but her pantry still made room for the oldest survival food the sea had ever known. Number 23, stewed figs and rice. On the third-class dinner menu for April 14th, the night the ship sank, stewed figs and rice were listed as the dessert. A kitchen hand would have soaked dried figs in water until they plumped soft, then simmered them with white rice and a little sugar until the liquid turned dark and syrupy. The result was sweet and dense, the kind of dessert that settled heavy in the stomach and kept hunger away through a cold Atlantic night. Dried figs cost pennies per pound in 1912 and traveled without refrigeration. Rice cost even less. For the immigrants sitting in the E-deck dining room that evening, this dessert was not far removed from what their own mothers had made back home. Some of them had never eaten in a dining room before in their lives. Some of them remarked in letters, written before boarding and never sent, that the food on the ship was the finest they had ever tasted. This was that food. Number 22, vegetable soup. Every class on the Titanic was served some version of soup at the midday meal. In third class, it was a plain vegetable soup, a long simmered pot of whatever root vegetables the kitchen had in quantity, carrots, turnips, onions, potatoes, all cut rough and cooked down into a thin broth seasoned with salt and a little pepper. The White Star Line provisioned the Titanic with 10 tons of flour, 75,000 pounds of fresh meat, 40 tons of potatoes, and 36,000 oranges for the voyage. The vegetable soup came from the bottom of that list. The cheapest items stretched furthest to feed the most people. A bowl of this in Liverpool or Cork would have cost a halfpenny from a street vendor. On the Titanic, it was included in the fare. Passengers ate it without complaint. It was warm. On an ocean crossing in April, warm was enough. Number 21, smoked herring. Smoked herring appeared on third-class breakfast menus as a protein option. Dark and oily and deeply flavored, carried aboard in tightly packed wooden casks, the way it had been stored for transport since the Middle Ages. For Scandinavian and Eastern European immigrants on the ship, this was not an unusual food. It was Tuesday. Smoked herring fed port cities and fishing villages across northern Europe for centuries because it lasted without refrigeration and packed more salt and protein per ounce than almost anything else in a kitchen. A Norwegian emigrant boarding at Southampton would have recognized it immediately. A Polish family from Krakow would have known it from the market. The herring was a point of connection in a dining room full of people who spoke 20 different languages and shared almost nothing except the direction they were heading. Number 20. Boiled potatoes. Every dinner served in third class on the Titanic included boiled potatoes. Plain, whole, unadorned. They came out of the kitchen the same way they came out of every boarding house kitchen in Ireland, Scotland, and the industrial towns of England. You boiled them in salted water until they were just past firm. Then you served them in a bowl with nothing else. The potato was the most democratic food on the ship. It asked no preparation skills of the cook beyond timing and salt. It filled the stomach completely. It cost almost nothing. In 1912, a 100-pound sack of potatoes cost less than $1 in any American port city. On a ship crossing the Atlantic in April, a boiled potato at dinner was not a humble offering. It was a certainty, a reliable thing, on a voyage where nothing else was guaranteed. Here is something the movies never show you. The Titanic was not one ship. It was three. First-class passengers paid up to $4,350 for a parlor suite, the equivalent of more than $130,000 today. They ate in a dining saloon paneled in white oak that seated 550 people, with menus printed fresh each day, real silver on the table, and a wine list. Second-class passengers paid between $60 and $90 and ate food that most first-class ocean liners of the era would have called first class. Their dining saloon had upholstered chairs and a full kitchen staff. Third-class passengers paid $7 to $9 and ate in a plain room on E-deck, 4 levels below the boat deck where the lifeboats were. They were served 3 meals a day, and the meals were filling and adequate, and designed with no other ambition than that. The White Star Line fed 2,223 people on a ship that sank in 2 hours and 40 minutes. What each of those people ate that night tells you more about 1912 than any history book will. Number 19. Curried chicken and rice. Second-class passengers on the Titanic ate better than first-class passengers on most ships of the era, and the curried chicken and rice was proof. This was a full plate, a generous portion of stewed chicken in a mild curry sauce thickened with flour and flavored with curry powder, onions, and stock, served over a mound of boiled white rice. Curry had been part of British cooking since the East India Company brought the spice trade home in the 1700s. By 1912, it appeared in middle-class households across England and Scotland as a regular weeknight supper. The second-class passengers on the Titanic were not wealthy people. They were teachers, tradesmen, clergymen, and merchants, people who had saved carefully for the crossing. They sat down to curried chicken and rice in a dining room with linoleum floors and wooden chairs, and they ate well, better than most of them had eaten at home. That was not a small thing. Number 18. Spring lamb with mint sauce. The roast spring lamb served to second-class passengers that last evening was carved from whole legs that the kitchen staff had seasoned with salt, roasted until the fat turned golden and crackling, and served with a mint sauce made from fresh mint leaves, vinegar, and a little sugar. Mint sauce with lamb was not a restaurant dish in 1912. It was a Sunday meal in the English-speaking world, the food you made on the one day of the week when the family sat down together and the meal mattered. The Titanic served it on a Sunday. April 14, 1912 was a Sunday. Second-class passengers eating roast lamb with mint sauce on a Sunday evening in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean were eating the most normal thing imaginable in the most extraordinary circumstances. 2 hours later, the engines stopped. Number 17. Baked haddock with sharp sauce. At the second-class luncheon on April 14th, baked haddock was served with a sharp sauce, a tangy, vinegar-based condiment made with capers, herbs, and mustard, designed to cut through the mild flavor of the fish. Haddock was the working fish of the North Atlantic, caught by the trawlermen of Scotland, Iceland, and Newfoundland in quantities that made it the cheapest protein available in British port towns. You could buy a fresh haddock in Liverpool for tuppence in 1912. Baking it with a sharp sauce was the way a careful cook turned a humble fish into something worth sitting down for. The second-class kitchen on the Titanic had a full brigade of trained cooks. They knew how to bake a haddock. The passengers ate it without thinking about whether it was remarkable. They did not know yet that the whole evening was remarkable. Number 16. Ox consommé with tapioca. Second-class passengers began their dinner on April 14th with a consommé. Ox consommé was a long, clarified beef broth, simmered for hours from roasted ox bones and aromatics, strained until it ran perfectly clear, then brought back to a simmer with small pearls of tapioca that cooked translucent in the hot liquid. The result was elegant in its simplicity, a clear, golden broth with little spheres floating through it. Tapioca thickened the consommé very slightly and gave it a texture that plain broth could not achieve. In Edwardian cooking, consommé was the opening statement of a proper dinner. It said that what followed had been thought about. For second-class passengers who had dressed for dinner and come down to the saloon expecting something better than an ordinary night, it delivered exactly that. Number 15. Roast turkey with cranberry sauce. The roast turkey on the second-class dinner menu was not a holiday bird by accident. The White Star Line provisioned its ships with turkey because turkey traveled well, kept well in cold storage, and served a crowd efficiently. A whole bird roasted in a ship's oven came out reliably, carved into portions, and served with cranberry sauce from tins imported from North America. The cranberry sauce was the American element. By 1912, American canned cranberries were being exported to Britain, where they were considered a slightly exotic condiment with a tart brightness that cut through the richness of roasted poultry. Second-class passengers eating roast turkey with cranberry sauce on a White Star liner in 1912 were eating something that felt celebratory without being excessive. It was the kind of meal you remembered afterward. Most of the people who ate it that Sunday did remember it afterward, for the rest of their lives. Number 14. Plum pudding with sweet sauce. The dessert that closed second-class dinner on April 14th was plum pudding, a dense, steamed pudding made from dried fruit, suet, flour, eggs, spices, and dark sugar, pressed into a pudding mold and steamed for hours until it set firm and dark as mahogany. Plum pudding in 1912 was not a Christmas-only dish. It was a year-round fixture in British boarding houses, railway dining cars, and institutional kitchens anywhere that needed a dessert that could be made ahead, stored, reheated, and served to 50 people without drama. The sweet sauce poured over it was a thin custard or a butter sauce, warm enough to soften the dense pudding on contact. Third-class passengers 4 decks below ate stewed figs and rice that same evening. Second-class passengers ate plum pudding. The ship served both with equal efficiency. One plate cost 12 times the other in terms of the ticket behind it. Here is what the historians rarely say plainly. The night the Titanic sank, the first-class kitchen was still cooking. Survivors pulled from lifeboats reported that the ship's lights stayed on, and the band kept playing, and the kitchens, by multiple accounts, continued to function, almost until the end. The crew fed people. They kept feeding people. That instinct to provide warmth and food in the middle of a catastrophe was not written into any emergency protocol. It was something the kitchen staff understood without being told. Most of the Titanic's culinary staff did not survive. Of the 18 men and women who worked in the first-class a la carte restaurant, only 4 made it off the ship. The kitchen crew, the bakers, the scullery staff, the pantry workers stayed at their posts longer than they had to. We remember the iceberg. We remember the lifeboats. We do not often remember the people who were still making tea when the water came in. Number 13. Cream of barley soup. First-class passengers on the Titanic began their last dinner with a choice of two soups, and the cream of barley was the humbler of the two. It was made from pearl barley simmered in stock until the grains burst and released their starch, then pureed smooth, enriched with cream, and seasoned carefully. The result was thick, golden, and warming. The kind of soup that cost almost nothing to produce on a large scale, because barley was the cheapest grain in any British kitchen store. John Jacob Astor ate this soup. Benjamin Guggenheim ate this soup. Isidore Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store, ate this soup. The wealthiest people in the Western world sat in a dining room with 9-foot ceilings and ate a cream soup made from barley, the grain that had fed European peasants for 4,000 years. The ship did not tell them that. The menu just called it cream of barley. They ate it without thinking about where barley came from. Number 12. Oysters à la Russe. The first course, actually placed in front of first-class passengers at dinner on April 14th, was a plate of fresh oysters served in the Russian style, which meant arranged on crushed ice with lemon wedges and a sharp mignonette sauce of red wine vinegar and cracked black pepper. The Titanic carried fresh shellfish in refrigerated storage that held temperatures low enough to keep oysters alive for the duration of the crossing. A plate of 6 oysters in a New York restaurant in 1912 cost between 50 cents and $1, already an extravagance. Served on the finest ocean liner afloat on the night of a full 7-course dinner, they were the opening flourish of a meal designed to remind its guests that they were not merely traveling, they were being treated. The oysters were eaten in minutes, the shells were cleared away, the ship sailed on. Number 11. Poached salmon with mousseline sauce. The fish course at first-class dinner was poached salmon served with mousseline sauce, a hollandaise enriched at the last moment with whipped cream folded in to make it lighter, airier, almost cloud-like. The salmon was poached in a court bouillon, a seasoned broth of wine, vegetables, and herbs, then lifted out and served warm with the mousseline pooled beside it and a spray of fresh herbs on top. A dish this precise required a trained saucier. The Titanic carried one. It required a fish cook with a delicate touch. The Titanic had that too. The first-class kitchen employed more than 60 people whose only job was to produce food at this level, night after night, for a crossing that was supposed to take 7 days. They had provisioned for 7 days. They cooked for 4. Number 10. Filet mignons, Lily. Named for Lily Langtry, the famous British actress, and one of the most celebrated figures of the Edwardian era, filet mignons Lily was a preparation of beef tenderloin medallions roasted to a precise medium rare, glazed with a truffle-enriched sauce, and garnished in a way that made the plate look like it belonged in a Paris hotel rather than a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. The tenderloin itself came from the most expensive cut of the most expensive animal on the Titanic's provisions list. The ship carried 75,000 pounds of fresh meat in cold storage. A small fraction of that was tenderloin, reserved exclusively for first class. A filet mignon in 1912 was not something a working person ever tasted. It was not something a second-class passenger tasted either. It was the food of a world so distant from the immigrants in steerage that they might as well have been on different ships. They were, in every way that mattered, on different ships. Number 9. Chateau potatoes. Even the potatoes in first class were not ordinary potatoes. Chateau potatoes were peeled, trimmed into smooth oval shapes, each one identical, then slowly cooked in clarified butter in a heavy pan, basted constantly until they turned a uniform deep gold on all sides, and the inside cooked through to a floury softness that plain boiled potatoes never achieve. The technique required patience and attention, and more butter than most families used in a week. A kitchen hand spent an hour producing a side dish that the diner consumed in 4 bites between the beef course and the salad. The difference between chateau potatoes and the boiled potatoes served in third class that same evening was not primarily a difference of ingredients, it was a difference of labor, time, attention. The same vegetable, pulled from the same storeroom, transformed into 2 entirely different experiences of the same crossing. Number 8. Pâté de foie gras. The cold side course offered to first-class passengers that last evening included a pâté de foie gras served with thin sliced toast and a small accompaniment of pickled vegetables. Foie gras in 1912 was the single most expensive ingredient in Western cooking, produced almost exclusively in the Périgord and Alsace regions of France, imported at great cost, and served only in the grandest establishments in London, Paris, and New York. The Titanic carried it in its first-class cold stores alongside fresh truffles, quail, and imported cheeses. The White Star Line spent $7,500 provisioning the Titanic for food and beverage on its maiden voyage. A meaningful portion of that went to the first-class a la carte restaurant, which operated as a separate dining room on B deck, staffed by its own kitchen crew, and charging separately for every plate. First-class passengers could dine in the main saloon on the included menu, or pay extra to eat even better. Some of them did both. Here is something the food industry does not talk about. The Titanic's 3-class meal system was not an accident of logistics. It was a model copied from every British institution of the era: the factory, the army, the hospital, the workhouse. You fed people according to what they had paid, and what they had paid reflected where they stood. Third-class passengers in 1912 were not expected to complain about boiled potatoes and stewed figs, because those passengers had no point of comparison except their own lives, and their own lives had been harder. The White Star Line actually exceeded legal requirements for third-class provisioning. They served 3 hot meals a day when they were only required to serve 2. They provided tea with sugar. They gave passengers bread at every meal. By the standards of 1912, they were generous. By any other standard, it was a dining room 4 levels below the lifeboats. When the order came to load the boats, first-class passengers were closer to the deck. In the Titanic's cargo manifest, in its menus, in its layout, the distance between a plate of oysters and a bowl of porridge was measured in money. In the end, it was measured in something else. Number 7. Roast duckling with applesauce. The roast duckling served to first-class passengers on April 14th came from a cold storage hold that the Titanic's provision list records as containing 750 pounds of poultry and game. The ducks were roasted whole in the ship's massive galley ovens, basted with their own fat until the skin crackled and browned, then carved tableside and served with a sharp applesauce made from cooking apples pureed with a little sugar and lemon. Applesauce with duck was an Old English pairing designed to cut through the rich, fatty meat with acid and sweetness. The technique was classical. The execution, in a galley producing food at this volume in the middle of an ocean crossing, was remarkable. The cooks who made this dish had trained in hotel kitchens in London and Southampton. They had come aboard for regular wages at a time when kitchen work paid poorly and the hours were long. Most of them are still at the bottom of the Atlantic. Number 6. Waldorf pudding. The Waldorf pudding, served to first-class passengers as a dessert option that evening, was a cold, molded dessert of apples, walnuts, cream, and gelatin, inspired by the famous Waldorf salad that had been created at the Waldorf Hotel in New York in the 1890s and adapted by pastry chefs into a sweet setting. It required hours of preparation and precise chilling in the ship's refrigeration stores. A pastry cook on the Titanic would have assembled these the morning of, turned them out onto chilled plates just before service, and dressed them with a little extra cream or a dusting of something fine. Waldorf pudding in 1912 existed only in the grandest hotel dining rooms in New York, London, and Paris. It was a dish invented by and for a class of people who expected their food to reflect their address. The Titanic's first-class dining room had been designed to look like a Jacobean manor house. The pudding matched the room. Number 5. Peaches in chartreuse jelly. One of the most striking items on the first-class dinner menu that last night was peaches in chartreuse jelly, a dessert that combined whole preserved peaches set in a clear green jelly flavored with chartreuse liqueur, the herbal French spirit made by Carthusian monks from a secret recipe of 130 plants. The jelly was poured into tall molds and chilled until firm, then unmolded and served in individual glass coupes, with the peaches suspended inside like amber and green glass. Chartreuse cost more per bottle in 1912 than most steerage passengers had spent on food in a month. Using it to flavor a dessert jelly was the kind of extravagance that required a kitchen with no budget constraint. The Titanic's first-class kitchen had no budget constraint. That was the point. Every element of first-class service was selected to remind its passengers that on this ship, there was no such thing as too much. The ship hit the iceberg at 11:40 in the evening. The dessert course had been cleared an hour before. Number 4. Punch romaine. Between the fish course and the meat course at first-class dinner, a palate cleanser appeared that most American diners would not recognize today. Punch romaine was a frozen sorbet made from white wine, rum, orange juice, and sugar syrup, served in a small cup with a thin, spun sugar garnish on top. Its purpose was to neutralize the flavors of the fish course before the heavier meat courses arrived, resetting the palate the way no amount of bread or water could. Punch romaine required a skilled pastry team to produce at scale. It required fine spirits and real citrus juice and a freezer running at precise temperatures. It required a kitchen that treated the space between courses as seriously as the courses themselves. Survivors who later gave testimony about that last dinner remembered the punch romaine specifically. They remembered it by name. A frozen rum punch in a spun sugar cup in the middle of the North Atlantic was the kind of thing you remembered. Number 3. Consommé Olga. The soup that opened first-class dinner on April 14, 1912, was Consommé Olga, and it has not appeared on a significant American menu since the Edwardian era ended. It was a perfectly clarified beef consommé, dark and jewel-clear, enriched with fish stock and flavored with a preparation of vesiga, the dried spinal cord of the Russian sturgeon, which swelled in the hot broth and gave the soup a texture and a depth that no other ingredient could replicate. Vesiga was a delicacy of Tsarist Russian cuisine, expensive to import, difficult to prepare, and completely unknown outside the grand hotel kitchens of Europe and New York. The Titanic carried it as a pantry provision for exactly this dish. After the First World War, ended Edwardian cooking. After the Russian Revolution, ended Tsarist cuisine. After the Second War, changed everything again. Nobody made consommé Olga anymore. The ingredients disappeared from Western markets. The recipe was archived and forgotten. The dish that the wealthiest people on Earth ate as their last, first course survives only in the menus printed that day and preserved in the archive of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. Number 2. Sirloin of beef with Chateau and Dauphine potatoes. The centerpiece of first-class dinner on April 14th was a carved sirloin of beef, roasted low and slow in the ship's main galley until the outside formed a deep crust and the interior stayed pink and yielding, served with both Chateau potatoes and Dauphine potatoes, a second preparation of potato mixed with choux pastry dough and deep-fried into light golden puffs that collapsed softly when you bit through them. 2 potato preparations for the same course. That detail alone tells you everything about what first-class dinner on the Titanic was designed to accomplish. It was designed to make people feel that the world could be made perfect, if only for an evening. The sirloin carved at the table, the potatoes plated precisely, the sauces poured, the sommelier moving between chairs with the wine. At the other end of the ship, someone was finishing a bowl of stewed figs and getting ready for bed. The North Atlantic was dark and cold, and the stars were unusually bright. Nobody aboard yet knew what that meant. Number 1. The last meal of the first-class dining saloon. The final meal served in the Titanic's first-class dining saloon lasted from 7 in the evening until nearly 10 o'clock. 11 courses: oysters, 2 soups, poached salmon, the punch romaine, filet mignon, roast duckling, sirloin of beef, cold plates, dessert, petit fours, fresh fruit, and coffee. Waiters moved between 550 settings in a room lit by electric chandeliers and decorated with furniture that had been built in the same Belfast workshops as the ship itself. The musicians' orchestra played in the reception room outside. Passengers lingered. They smoked. They drank. They talked about arriving in New York on Wednesday morning. The meal was, by every account from survivors, extraordinary. Not one person at that table could have eaten better anywhere in the world that night. Not the Ritz in Paris, not Delmonico's in New York, not the Savoy in London. The Titanic's first-class dining room, on her maiden voyage, on a Sunday evening in April, was the finest table in the world. The iceberg was 400 miles ahead. The water temperature outside was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The lookouts in the crow's nest had no binoculars. 4 hours later, the dining saloon was underwater. The silver was still on the tables. Here is my challenge. Look up the third-class menu from the Titanic and cook one item from it this week. The boiled potatoes, the vegetable soup, the oatmeal porridge. Make it plain, make it the way they would have made it. Nothing extra. Sit down at your table and eat it, and think about the 709 people who survived that crossing, and the 1,517 who did not, and think about what they ate that last evening, and whether the food on their plate told them the truth about their chances. Then come to the comments and tell me which class of passenger you think had the better meal, or which dish on this list surprised you most. I want to know if anyone else finds it impossible to eat oysters without thinking about this ship. I want to know if Consommé Olga deserves to come back, because these were not just menus, they were a portrait of a world that thought it was unsinkable, drawn in 11 courses and a bowl of oatmeal on the last night before everything changed.